Welcome to Independently Speaking, the new podcast of the Independent Schools Association. Celebrating our diversity, we take pride in representing a broad spectrum of educational settings, including nursery, preparatory, senior, sixth form, and boarding schools. This vibrant network includes institutions specializing in the arts, sports, and faith-based education, along with those offering exceptional assistance for students with special educational needs or disabilities. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Independently Speaking. Now here is your host, ISA Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
This episode, we're going to be exploring a question that's on many educators' minds. How do we make space for AI in our schools? Not just as a tool, but as a partner in the learning process. And I'm really pleased to welcome Darren Coxon with us today. He's the co-founder and executive director of Kompass Education, a company that provides schools and colleges with the training and support they need in order to innovate safely and securely with AI. Welcome, Darren.
It's lovely to be here.
Now, Darren, for our listeners, not everybody would know you. Could you give a bit of a background to sort of your career a little bit and how you got into working with AI?
Yeah, sure. So like I think many people, I almost fell into it slightly by accident. So, I mean, my background is firmly education. I'm definitely not an ed tech person by background. I was an English literature teacher, theory of knowledge teacher for many years, and then kind of worked my way through headships. Became a chief operating officer for a group of international schools. One of them was a school in Tunisia, a Kompass, British international school in Tunisia. And I was the head there, the interim head, because as chief operating officer, I was sent in really sort of to take on an interim headship. And I was there when ChatGPT was first released. And I think, I very quickly understood within about 24 hours, that this was a tool which was going to be profoundly disruptive, potentially positively and negatively, that it would have the potential to be both very positive and very negative, depending on the way which it was going to be handled. And sure enough, within 2 weeks of ChatGPT's release, New York State banned ChatGPT across their campuses, which actually was then rolled back when they realized that there was no way that they could ban it. And so we were one of the first schools in the school in Tunisia to get the staff trained. And what we did then is we worked towards, at the end of that academic year, doing a collapsed curriculum week that we called AI Week. And we had students who were running with passion projects with AI and learning about sustainable development goals. And it really made me understand the power of these tools when you use them in a very intentional way. So I then made the decision to move back to the UK to set up what was Coxon AI, but now is Kompass Education. As you say, just focusing on how can you use them in an innovative way, but how can you do that safely?
And one of the terminologies you use is a cybernetic classmate. It's one of the phrases that you've used quite commonly. Could we delve a bit deeper into that, and can you explain what that actually means?
Yeah, so I mean, this really comes off the back of some work that Ethan Mollick, who is the assistant professor of business at the Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania. And he did a piece of work quite recently, just earlier this year, in fact, where he partnered with Harvard and they worked with Procter & Gamble. And what they did is they did research into to what extent, what impact would AI have on the team? Because most of the research to date had been done around AI's impact on individual productivity. But what Mollick and the team of researchers at UPenn and Harvard did is look at it with the team. And so essentially what they did is they researched the degree to which teams without using AI could think outside the box, could come up with solutions to everyday and more challenging problems, and to what extent could the team that had AI inside do the same thing. And what they actually found is that what he called the cybernetic team were much more successful, more broadly. The sort of top 10% tier of challenges, they were just more effective, but also their job satisfaction was higher. They enjoyed it more. They liked working with these AI tools. And it led me to kind of consider, if that's how the world of work is now going, and we as educators have to prepare our young people for the world of work, then for me it's logical that we push that down into schools and consider the notion of the cybernetic classmate having AI inside of our school, inside of our processes, but doing it in a way that it's safe and it's well monitored, well controlled, so that the relationship that the students have with AI is a very productive and safe one.
And obviously, AI is in many classrooms and students are using it. But how do you see the role of AI in the classroom as it actually is today compared to what it could be?
Yeah. So I think at the moment, there isn't a great deal of AI, I would say, inside the classroom experience. And what I mean is that, as I say, working alongside a student and helping them and supporting them. What we're tending to see is AI that will support teacher time saving. There's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, we want AI to be able to help in that respect. So that's at the beginning of the process, but we're also seeing AI more negatively at the end of the process with endpoint assessment. So we're seeing, for example, students using AI to write their essays for them, and that's becoming an increasing problem. And there's a lot of noise around that at the moment, that people are very nervous, and we're talking about coming down hard on them. And S2E2 published some guidance this week saying that teachers will need to interrogate students as to the source of their essays, and some of the language is quite kind of, discipline and punish language as opposed to anything more nurturing and supportive. So I think what we're not really seeing at the moment, in any wholesale way, the adoption of AI as a tool to support the process. And I think that's where we need to head. We need to see AI working alongside students and teachers, supporting the learning process.
And that's where the terminology cybernetic classmate has originated. But how does this cybernetic classmate differ from traditional educational technology that staff are still sometimes struggling with, such as the smartboard or the learning apps that they might use?
So I would say that what we've had to date are a series of shiny rectangles. So, we have our normal whiteboard that we have on the wall, and then we replace it with a shiny version, which doesn't do anything different. I mean, I always thought that the one advantage, or the one thing that an interactive whiteboard could do, is a student could come to the classroom and they could drag their finger across the whiteboard and move something from one part of the whiteboard to the other. Other than that, there isn't a great deal that an interactive whiteboard can do, other than maybe be a good tool for organisation. And I would say it's the same as the case for the productivity tools that have found their way into schools, like Microsoft OneNote is a classic example. Google Classroom is another. But I would say the Microsoft OneNote and the Microsoft Surface combination, which is quite popular in schools now, that's a tool for organisation, not innovation. It's good for organising your lesson plans and your class notes, and students can keep their notes in one place so they're not losing it. But it's not fundamentally impacting on pedagogy. And if anything, I think some teachers can hide behind it. So I think what AI does is it moves us away from the box. AI is not, even though it's bizarrely in what we call a black box, AI is a very unbounded technology, and it's also now multimodal. We can have conversations with AI tools in real time. So now we can actually move away from the shiny rectangle, and that might actually help us to, I'm hoping, move education on.
Absolutely. And obviously, the interactions that students have with AI, sometimes it builds almost relationships, and sometimes it's been humanized. What kind of interactions and relations do you see students having with AI if they're using it effectively in the classroom?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the challenges that we have, and one of the concerns that we have with AI right now, are the more personalized relationships, like friendship bots, girlfriend bots. We hear talk about this, and how there've been news items where there was just a couple of months ago a student who committed suicide because they'd got too deep in with their friendship bot. I mean, I suppose the argument was that the prime reason why this young person took their life? And I won't say either way, but certainly it didn't help. The relationship that this young man had with this AI tool didn't help his mental health at all. So I think that on that level, the kind of chatbot level, I do have some concerns. I have big concerns, for example, with my AI, which is the AI inside of Snapchat. I think actually it has a potentially quite insidious effect on young people because they are starting to personify them. They're seeing them as friends. We had Mark Zuckerberg this week talk about how he's quite keen for young people to use his Meta chatbot as a friend. I think that's actually quite seriously problematic. But where I see it being very effective is where we, the teachers, are very intentional in how we deploy these tools to students. So one example might be that we provide our students with a chatbot which is trained to be an absolute expert in just one subject, and it will not stray outside of that subject. So let's say I'm an English teacher and I'm teaching Macbeth, and I'm going to give my students access to a chatbot which is trained on Macbeth, so it knows the play really well. It knows my teaching technique really well. It knows the AQA or whatever syllabus really well, and it can just act as like this really expert guide. I've also seen this done absolutely brilliantly. I was observing a lesson a couple of months ago in a school that I'm working with. Great school, really committed. And what the teacher had done is he'd used Google Notebook LM, which is an 18+ tool, but he was using it with the class. He was leading the lesson, so that's absolutely fine. And what he'd done is he'd created the digital consciousness of René Descartes. And he said, what I've done is I've trained it on all of Descartes' writings. He said, I've trained it on all of my research, because he was a philosophy a PhD. And he basically created this digital consciousness of René Descartes. And what he did is he asked the students to write questions to ask this digital consciousness. And what was fascinating about it is that his physical position in the classroom changed. What he did is he delivered the lesson at the beginning and he was facing the pupils. But then when they were asking questions of this tool, he turned and he faced the board. And I watched him. I don't think he even knew he was doing it. He took 2 steps backwards and he was standing in amongst the pupils. And he was, one of the questions was asked, I can't remember what it was, and AI came out with this very, very interesting response. And the teacher said, do you know, I've never thought of that before. Let's unpick this together. I thought, wow, completely changed the relationship. And it almost became like the AI became the expert in the room. And it kind of factored the relationship of the teacher, where he actually became one of the students as well.
And with your work with the schools, have you noticed that there's been any specific age groups or subject areas where it's more transformative or most problematic? Because you've given a really good example there of it working really well. But are there any age groups maybe it doesn't work or it's more effective?
Yeah, I think at the moment, still probably it's better suited to older students and language-based subjects. So English, philosophy, history, geography. But it is, and also some of the kind of the subjects that don't have so much technical sort of symbolic approaches. So biology is an example. Definitely seeing it still sometimes challenged around a subject like chemistry, which will use, different types of language. We use the language of symbol as well as the vocabulary. Maths, I think it's getting better. I think certainly the more recent models are getting better at maths. But I do think at the moment, in terms of subject level, because they're called large language models, they just deal with language better. But that's not going to be the case for much longer, because I just did a demonstration where we talked about an AI voice model talking through a maths question, and it could read latex markup. It was able to actually read the maths, the symbolic language of maths, not just words. In terms of age groups, definitely older students at the moment, mainly because most of these tools are 13+. So ChatGPT, Google Gemini, at the moment are 13+. Google is changing its approach. If you have a family subscription now, you can use, under 13s are actually allowed to use these tools in a family subscription. So I would imagine that Google will be the first that will release these tools for under 13 use. And I think at that point, we will start to see more younger students using these tools, like a little study buddy, a tool that might help a student with some literacy challenges, or a tool that might help do some research on a project. But at the moment, language-based subjects for older pupils, it tends to be the sweet spot.
And you talk quite a lot about redesigning the curriculum for the AI world. So obviously that will link very much into that. But what are the core elements that must change in the curriculum from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I talk about curriculum X. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a made up. It's a placeholder name, I suppose, if anything. It's a bit of a straw man, possibly even, just for us to kind of sort of look at and either go with or beat down. I firmly believe that we have to move away from the siloed mentality that we have. I mean, look, we've been talking, I mean, I led on one of the first iPad one-to-ones. That was 2010, 2011. We were talking about it then. Ken Robinson, 2008, Changing Educational Paradigms, was talking about it then. I mean, this is not new. This is not new stuff that we're talking about. Alvin Toffler was talking about it in, his book, Learning for Tomorrow, in 1970, it was 25 years ago, and which is a brilliant book. His essay at the beginning of that book is still, for me, one of the best essays written on the future of education. And that was 50 years ago. It was 1975, 50 years ago. So this is not new. What we're talking about is not new. But I think because of the way in which AI works and the way in which AI can organize us in the background, it lends itself really well to moving from what I kind of liken the AI roadmap version of education that we're in right now towards the Google Maps version of AI, where we know the end point, we know where we need to get to, but we can take different routes to get there. So, rather than it being the hour of English and the hour of maths and the hour of science, actually we can have interdisciplinary projects where we can weave subjects together into inquiry-based learning style projects, where pupils are working on things that genuinely interest them, that they know are relevant, that they may even, through a particular topic, come up with solutions that are useful outside of their class and outside of their school. I think what that will do, or what AI will do, is it will work as an organizational structure that sits behind that, so that students can work towards wherever they need to get to, whether it be doing A-levels or IB, whether it be working through some process portfolios, whatever it is, whether it be moving straight from school into the world of work, whether it be setting up their own business, whatever it is. It's just going to be able to organize them so we can move away from siloed subjects. And if we move away from siloed subjects, then do we need lesson plans, schemes of work, timetables? The answer is probably not.
And do you foresee any disciplines that might be completely reimagined from what we study now?
Yeah, so I think, I think maybe if we just look at the sciences, at the moment we have biology, chemistry, physics, we have computer science, which is kind of almost slightly bolted on as one of the scientific disciplines. And I can see us looking at how natural and artificial systems coexist, and at the point at which silicon and carbon-based systems work alongside one another. So I think that's just one example of moving away from three sciences and computer science towards, the team. I suppose that, again, going back to the notion of cybernetic teammate, how we team up as a carbon-based intelligence with a synthetic intelligences, and what that means at the level of science.
And one of the things, obviously, teachers might be shouting out as they listen to our podcast is how do you strike a balance between that teaching that foundational knowledge and fostering that AI-enabled critical thinking? Yeah. Is there a way of managing that? Yeah,
so that's the biggest challenge, isn't it? What we call cognitive offloading. If we give this stuff to AI to do, then surely our pupils won't be learning the foundational knowledge. I think there has to be a balance. And I think probably the schools of the future will absolutely ensure that their young people have the foundational skills. How they learn them may differ. So, whether you agree or disagree, and I'm a bit on the fence about it, but Alpha School in Texas, they have 2 hours a day where they have self-paced learning modules, again, with AI support, where they're learning the stuff. They're learning the knowledge they need in 2 hours a day. And the rest of their day, they're doing project-based learning. They're doing sports and arts and entrepreneurship and et cetera, et cetera. And it's an interesting model, and I think it's one that's worth exploring further. So I don't think for one moment we should be throwing all of that out. I think people, we need to learn to read and write, and we need to be able to have some cultural capital and learn about the world, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there are probably the delivery model feels like it needs to change. What is being the basics? I think we still need to learn, but maybe we can just deliver them in a more interesting way.
And is there a way that we can ensure that this integration of AI doesn't widen the already existing inequalities in our education system that are quite often flagged up?
Yeah, I think there is a big danger of that, and we're already seeing it. I'll take a tool like Grammarly. Grammarly is a really good example of this. The free version of Grammarly has some pretty basic AI inside it. It does a reasonable job. As soon as you pay £20 a month for it, it's a completely different animal. It has features and functionalities that you just don't get in the free model. And it's the same. It's less of a case now with the frontier models. So models like ChatGPT and Claude and Google Gemini, they've actually released the best quality for free. So it's actually, in some respects, a lot more democratized than it was. But as soon as you move away from the playing, as soon as you move away from playing with these tools to using them properly, I'll give you one example. It's actually a live example right now. As soon as you move away from the playing version into the serious version, that's when you come up against barriers and blocks if you're not paying. So I use an app called Claude. And Claude is an AI, very similar to ChatGPT, works in a very similar way to ChatGPT. It's a large language model, but it's a different company called Anthropic. And in my opinion, it is the best coder of all of the AI tools. I mean, it's exceptional. And when I tell you that I have just finished building an app where teachers can share trained chatbots with a knowledge-based students, and the teachers can monitor the student use of those chatbots, and it will send an alert, a flag, if students are using these tools, all coded from scratch using Claude. Then you can, and I'm an English teacher, then you can see how powerful it is. And that's a live example, but there is absolutely no way I could have done it without paying for the top tier, which is £75 a month, of Claude. It would be impossible. So I think that's where I think that when we're at the playing mode, free's fine. But as soon as we move into the serious productivity mode, then we simply do have to start paying. And that's where I see the divide happening. I think that in school, we can probably get away with playing with these tools. But as soon as we start wanting to use tools that are monitored and controlled and safeguarded, someone's going to have to pay for that. So that's where I think that we're going to see a bit more of a digital divide. What I'm hoping is the government recognise this. They stop investing money in substandard lesson planning AI tools. I'm not going to name the company, but they are investing their money in subpar lesson planning tools, and they start investing their money in tools which actually support this move in this kind of change in pedagogical approach that creates safe AI tools for students to use that will actually make them more autonomous. And I think the more autonomous students become, the more teachers will have to raise their game and they will have to change their practice, because otherwise they're going to lose the kids. They're just going to run away with this stuff.
And are there any ethical considerations that we need to be mindful of as we bring AI directly to our students?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is a lot of concern over things like bias. And yes, there are some biases in AI because they reflect the biases in the training data. So they've been trained on human data and humans are biased. But what we're now seeing is this is becoming a less of an issue. The more advanced these tools become, the less brute force they're using and the more nuance they have, actually the less biased, and they're also being trained in such a ways where they're mitigating against these biases. The image generators are still quite biased, but my pushback when people say that is, yes, but if you look at social media broadly, and if you look at the images that humans produce, they are significantly more biased, towards what beauty is, how young people should look, how they should act, how they should behave. That's not AI, that's humans. So I actually think AI is much less concerning to me as a parent and a teacher than AI. Hallucinations is the other one, when AI makes stuff up. But now the more recent models are becoming almost unhallucinatory. The recent tests show that these tools are 98, 99% accurate, which is a lot more accurate than humans. I've observed so many lessons where I've been sitting at the back. I was thinking about this earlier on. Pathetic fallacy no teacher I've ever observed ever gets that right. When they talk about the pathetic fallacy, which is a literary term, no one seems to understand it. You ask AI, it will almost certainly get it right. And so I think that we need to get away from the fact that AI is bad and it makes stuff up and it's biased and humans are good and virtuous. That's just not the case at all. I think we're now seeing AI doing, if not as well, if not better than. Where we need to be mindful is intentionally teaching students how to use these tools, where they end and AI begins. And I talk about how you should never put AI between you and other people. So I say when I work with teachers and students, you are all you've got. Your relationship with people is all you've got. Your ability to speak, to hold a conversation, to communicate in writing, to communicate in speaking. I say AI, have AI beside you or behind you and never in front of you. Don't use AI to write your LinkedIn posts, please, because we all know you're doing it. Don't use AI to write your blog posts. You need to do that yourself. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but that's not a bad thing. Have AI as a planning tool, as an ideation tool, as a tool to support your learning, but don't use it to write your essays, because ultimately nobody wins.
And for those schools and teachers and educators who might be listening, what small first steps could they make towards that so that they are doing things the right way?
Yeah, I think I was just talking about this in the keynote that I just gave this morning. So I think it really needs to begin at the top. It needs to begin with leadership being intentional about how they talk about AI and how that's codified in policy. Because the problem that we have at the moment is that teachers are kind of using it in the background and they're feeling a bit guilty about it. And they're thinking, oh, it does a really good job here, but I'm not going to tell anyone because it's like my secret superpower. But I'm feeling a little bit guilty about using it. I think we need to get to the point very, very soon. And I would say this term is the best time, moving towards September 25, where we're very intentional about how we talk about these tools and we capture that in policy. If we get that right, and if the leadership team are saying, right, we're going to go in this direction, and these are the ways in which we're going to look at using AI. Maybe we're going to start by using a tool which will help us to plan some lessons. Okay, let's start there. There's nothing wrong with that. I think there are some tools that are better than others at doing that, but that's not necessarily the worst way of using AI to start with. But I would say that the thing that teachers should be doing right now is playing with the tools. Okay, that's the key. The key is grab ChatGPT, don't have any agenda, just chat to it and see what it can do. Can you plan me this? Doesn't do very well. Can you make it better? Can you, enable the search tool? Can you go online and find me some sources to make this resource better? Can you make this more project-based learning focused? Can you differentiate it for different learners? Literally just have a chat. That's what I just say. There's no such thing as prompt engineering anymore. It's a complete myth. If you saw how I used AI, most people would laugh. Because I often use shouty capitals with it. I'm often using exclamation marks. No, that is not what I asked for. Read what I just said. Go step by step. I even say things like, take a deep breath. And this is really important you get this right. I've even at one point saying, my job depends on this. And honestly, I'm not kidding you. It can sometimes say, I'm so sorry, and it will do it properly. So it sounds like I'm sort of promoting anthropomorphizing or making AI human. It's not really that. It's just seeing it as a very, very clever assistant who has no idea what I want. And I'm literally just going to play with that assistant and just see what happens. So I would say right now, forget the fear, forget the nonsense about prompt engineering, and just chat to it and see what it does.
And that fear is quite real for some staff, isn't it? And are there any parallels that you've seen that you could draw between this moment in education, any past technological shifts in schools?
Not really, I suppose. I mean, if I again look back to the time when I was introducing iPads, I remember I was giving talks quite similar to this morning, heralding in a new dawn and a paradigm. And we even used the awful terms like paradigm shift. And I don't think I've ever said game changer. I'm hoping I never said game changer, but certainly paradigm shift, I'm pretty certain I said on more than one occasion. But actually, when we look back, we recognize that nothing really was impactful. And I think the reason is no student adopted the interactive whiteboard to help them with their learning. No student adopted an iPad to help them with their learning. They use them to play video games. But now students are adopting AI to help them learn and to help them understand and to obviously help them save time when writing essays. But, they genuinely, the students who understand this recognize that actually these are tools that can genuinely help them learn, which is why I think this is a technology. I don't even call it technology, really. This is a kind of a tool is more impactful. And so I can't really look back. Maybe the calculator, I suppose, in the early 80s, I remember when I was at school and when the calculator came out, we saw that as being a bit of a shift. And certainly the teachers did. The teachers were up in arms about these calculators. We had to calculator papers for O-level, and that was just the end of the world. And now it's just normal. I think this is so much more. I actually liken it to the invention of the steam. It's more akin to the invention of the printing press, in terms of its democratization of knowledge, and the steam engine in terms of what the steam engine did for the Industrial Revolution.
And obviously the change is also very rapid, isn't it? And it's on a very upward trajectory. Now, I know predictions are always tricky, but from your point of view, how do you imagine classrooms might look like, say, in 10 years' time?
I'm going to tell you what I hope,
okay,
rather than what necessarily will happen. So I think that we will stop, if you think about what a classroom is for, so it's about form following function. Yeah, that's the correct way around. Form following function, architectural principle, where the form of the size of the room follows its purpose. And the reason that we have a 40 to 50 meter square classroom that fits 30 children is because it's been seen as sort of the optimal number that, when my father was at school, it was classes of 50 or 60, but he was regularly beaten. And so I think that the less that we have fear and shame in our schools, the smaller the classes have to become. Because, my father, if he got a spelling wrong, he went to the front of the classroom and he said the teacher used to hit him across the back of the hand with the side of the ruler. Not just the flat of the side of the ruler, because he was obviously quite sadistic, this guy. But you know what? My dad said, we got the work done and we behaved, because they were all terrified. So I think we've got to this kind of 40 to 50 meter square classroom, because that's kind of the optimal number of children that we can teach in a classroom based on our current delivery model. If we move towards a much more one-to-one approach, where AI study buddy, with teams of pupils working on real-world projects together, I think we can dispense with the notion of the traditional classroom. We tried that with BSF. That was a failure. We suddenly moved to these plaza learning schools in the late 90s and early 2000s, and we weren't ready. The education system simply was not ready for this open plan, because we hadn't changed our delivery model, because we still had the teacher stood at the front of the class. And what tended to happen in these plaza learning schools was that the very loud male geography teacher would be delivering the lesson, and all of the other classes in the open plan plaza would hear this geography teacher, and they had to start retrofitting classrooms, and it was very expensive, and it was a bit of a failure. I think we will probably find that we'll be shifting more back towards these open plan areas where we have spaces for small group work, where we have spaces for one-to-ones, where we have spaces where kids can work on their own undisturbed. But ultimately, it will be the different ways in which we approach the learning journey. There will be spaces to suit. So I think that's the way I can see education changing. And in terms of the delivery model, I think what I'm hoping will happen is that we move away from what I suppose we call the one-to-many model, where one teacher and many students, and turn that on its head and move much more towards pupils and groups of pupils surrounded by a support network. And one of those support elements would be AI, another one could be the teachers, another one could be their peers, another one could be people from business coming in and supporting students, with expert knowledge. So I think we'll kind of almost see an inversion. I think if we get to that point, I think we'll also potentially see a lot of smaller schools, more boutique schools springing up. That's another potential. But you know what? No one knows for sure.
Absolutely, we don't know for sure, but that's a really sort of reflective and positive view of how it may go. So thank you for that. Now, if any of our listeners wanted to continue this conversation because they've been piqued of interest of something that you've said, how can they learn more about your work?
The best place is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is really, I build my business around my LinkedIn presence. So it's just Darren/Coxon. So it's very easy to find me on LinkedIn. And I publish every day pretty much. And I tend to try and not add to the noise where possible. It's hard. It's really hard sometimes because there's a lot of noise. I try not to. I try where possible to offer ideas and opinions that maybe are thought-provoking. But I also try and offer practical advice. Here's a really good prompt that can do such and such. Here's a new model that's been released and you can use it for X, Y, and Z. So I try where possible to be as practical. I have a website, Kompass Education, but it's most of the work I'm doing and most of my online presence goes through LinkedIn.
That's brilliant, Darren. This has been an amazing conversation. You've given up so much expertise. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
My huge pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
And to our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you're interested, we have previous and future episodes based around this topic. Do listen in and do follow us. So stay curious, stay connected, and see you next time.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.